Hey guys, Stewart, and welcome to the December 2016 APOCABOX Skills Challenge, how to weave a gill net. Now, if you've done your homework, then you've already watched the documentary Happy People, A Year in the TAIGA. And if you've watched that documentary, you know that a big part of their food source comes from the Yensei River and using gill nets. So I thought a very important and practical skill for this month's skills challenge is how to weave a gill net using materials that you make. Now here's what you need in order to get started. On your contents list, you have a couple of templates for net weaving needles. You're going to want to go ahead and cut one of those out. I'm going to use the smaller one in this video. The only thing that you'll have to source on your own is a paint stick. And you can typically pick these up free at almost any hardware store. And this paint stick is going to be the source of our net weaving needle and also our mesh gauge. Now I'm going to try to include some cotton twine in your APOCABOX this month. If I'm not able to do it, then all you'll need is some type of twine that doesn't have memory. And as long as you can hold it and bend it and it flops back down without having memory, it's going to work really well for learning how to weave a net. You'll also need a pencil to trace that template or a pen, and then you'll need a knife to make some cuts. What we're going to end up with is a small, about a 5 by 5, about a 5 mesh by 5 mesh approximately gill net. Okay, so we're not going to weave an entire net. That would take several hours of video production. So I'm going to teach you everything you need to know on a small scale about how to weave a gill net. Let's get started. Okay, so first things first, we're just going to cut out our net needle template. We're going to lay it on our paint stick here. I'm going to choose the side that doesn't have these little indentions. I'm just going to lay it on my paint stick here. I'm going to lay it up against the edge because it eliminates me having to do one entire cut. And then I'm just going to hold it in place. I'm just going to carefully trace the outside edges and the inside edges with my pen. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It's so important to understand how to use a net weaving needle and how to make your own, because it's not really something that you typically have in a survival kit. Even though I have included a plastic net weaving needle in your kit, I still want you to know how to make one on your own. And these templates are a really good place to start. Now you could obviously cut this out of, baton this out of a piece of wood too. It's just the paint stick makes a perfect beginner's tool for getting it done. Okay, so here I have my net weaving needle traced out. I'm going to take my knife. This is the Whiskey Camp, by the way. And the paint stick is so thin, I can literally just kind of trace that with my knife a few times. Just nice and careful. This takes a couple of minutes for sure. But if you just take your time and trace and push down on that outline, it only takes a few passes to where you're almost through it and you can kind of snap off the pieces. And then you can finish the carving after you've got the net needle cut out. Now the spot where that's really important is on the interior here. A lot of the exterior of the net needle can be carved away, which makes it really easy. It's that interior where you really need some of that tracing action. And if you trace in little V cuts, you can kind of weed away some of that material. Just using the point of my knife here to press through that wood, kind of create a perforated line almost. Then we'll go up there and clean that up with the tip of the knife a little bit later. Now we're just smoothing out all the edges of these lines by kind of carving them. And I'm just using little small push cuts with my thumb, nothing sweeping. I'm going to do the same thing to this little needle portion in the middle. You want to be careful so you don't break that off. Otherwise, you got to start over. You want these to be smooth because ultimately you've got some twine that's got to wrap in and around this needle here. So you want them to be smooth so that your twine isn't catching. Sharp little pocket knife like the Nomad knife from last month would be a great knife for carving this. You know, if you've got a big blade, you're going to struggle, because this is one of those tasks that requires, you know, some pretty detailed carving. There we go. Before we carve this needle out, we're going to go ahead and cut our paint stick in half, because the other half of this paint stick is going to be your mesh gauge. Snap that there at the score line. And now I've got a mesh gauge, and then I've also got my needle that I'm going to carve out of. I'm just going to carve away the excess here around that line. Now I'm just going to carve out the bottom of that needle, working from each side. This paint stick wants to split, so you just got to be really careful when doing this part. You don't want to split it. Just using these little cuts to carve that out. There we go. And now I'm just going to take just a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to really smooth out the edges of this net needle, because this is going to have to go in and out of our net, and any kind of rough edge or burr is going to catch while we're weaving. So I'm wanting to just to smooth out all the edges of that so that it goes in and out of that net making really easily. There we go. That looks pretty good. You want a nice sharp tip, because you've got to kind of push that tip in and out in between some strings. You want that to be nice and sharp. No little burrs on there. There we go. Good. Now while you're down here up close, I want you to see these two side by side. You've got your net needle, which is this one right here, and then you've got your mesh gauge, which is this one right here. Now it's really important that your net needle is smaller than your mesh gauge, which you can see that it is right here, because your net needle ultimately ends up feeding in and out of your meshes, and so the net needle has to be smaller than the gauge. That's why I use that smaller template rather than the larger one, which is about the same size of this. So make sure to use a smaller net needle than your net gauge. This mesh gauge right here is about a 1-inch mesh, so that's going to create a mesh that's about 1 inch wide and 1 inch tall. Okay, to load your net needle is really simple. We're going to take the end of our twine, going to create a little loop. We're just going to go in there and hook it over the needle part of our needle, this interior needle, and then we're just going to simply twist these two together so that they stay. You can hold that with your thumb if you want to. We're going to go down around the bottom. Every time you go down the bottom, you flip the needle. You always load to the left-hand side of this interior needle. So I'm going to push that interior needle out with my finger so that I can get my twine around it. I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm at the bottom, so I flip my needle. And then I'm going to load to the left of that needle, down to the bottom, flip my needle, load to the left of that needle, flip the bottom, load to the left of the needle, flip the bottom, load to the left of the needle. And we're going to keep doing this until it's filled up. Now you don't want to fill it too much, but you know, you could probably get a couple yards of twine on a needle this size at a time. You'd be surprised at how far this goes once we start weaving. We'll only have for our little 5x5 mesh that we're making, our little mini gill net, we'll only have to load this needle once. All right. See what I'm doing? I'm loading to the left and flipping each time. There we go. Don't push on your interior needle too hard because you don't want to snap it. And I could load quite a bit more twine onto this needle if I wanted to, but I'm just going to do a few more, and I think that'll be plenty. Okay, and then I'm just going to simply trim it off when I'm done. Now it's time to set up our netting station so that we can start using this net needle. So to start our net, we have to choose an anchor point, and I'm just going to use this chair right here. You can use anything. I'm going to take about 2 feet of twine. I'm going to fold it in half so I've got a big bend. And now I'm going to tie just a little loop using an overhand knot in the end of this. About like that. And now I'm going to tie this around my anchor point because I always work from the same spot when weaving a net. So I'm going to tie this to this anchor point right here. Get up a little bit closer. Tie this to this anchor point. And this loop right here is our starting point for our net. We take the end of our twine, maybe undo it just a little bit. Take the end of the twine on our needle, and we're just going to tie it around this knot, just a little overhand knot, nothing special. Just an overhand knot to hold it in place right there. And now I'm right-handed, so I use the needle in my right hand and the mesh gauge is in my left hand. Now the first row of the net is a little bit different than all of the other meshes. So the first row of meshes is a little bit different. So I'm only going to teach you everything that I'm going to teach you in this 5x5 is all you need to know on how to weave a gill net. So I'm going to teach you the first row of meshes first, and then we're going to move to the second row of meshes, and you do the entire net like we do the second row of meshes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mesh gauge and I'm just going to put it behind the rope right here. And you got to be patient with this process because there is a learning curve. I'm going to take my net needle and I'm going to put it through my loop like that right there, and I can kind of control my mesh gauge now by pulling on this twine. Okay, now I want to leave myself it's got to be a little bit bigger than my needle right here. See how I could go all the way up to the loop if I wanted, but I don't want to do that on this first row of meshes. I want to leave myself a space that's at least a little bit bigger than my needle. Okay, and now here's where the kind of knotting process starts. I want you to pay close attention to this part right here. I hold this with my thumb. I bring the twine up and hold it with my finger like that right there. I'm going to do it again. I've still got this space right here. Okay. Okay. I'm going to hold this with my thumb on my mesh gauge. I'm bringing this up and I'm pinching it with my finger right there. Okay. And now at this point right here, we go behind both of these, behind both of those, and then just in the one of them, in between them. Okay, so we go behind the first time, both of them, and now we go in between them the second time. Okay, and then we're going to let go of our twine and pull that to a knot. Okay, and now we're going to do that one more time. This is the difference in this first row. We're going to do that one more time, except we're just going to lock it in place by going behind both of them and pulling it to a knot. Okay, these are actually supposed to be together, but that's okay. It won't. This is our first row of meshes. It won't matter that much. So that's our first knot. Okay, so now I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna hook this first initial loop one more time, and we're gonna do the same thing all over again. Okay, I'm gonna pinch this with my thumb, I'm gonna hold this with my finger, I'm gonna go behind the two I just created once, and then I'm gonna go behind, in between them once. And then I'm gonna pull that to a knot. And now I'm gonna lock that into place by going behind them once. See how that knot is, those two are together and the first two aren't? This one's right and this one's, it's kind of right, but not really right. Now we're gonna do this again. This is our knot, we're gonna do 5 meshes, we're on our second mesh. I'm gonna come, I'm gonna loop, I'm gonna hook my initial loop that we made. And the whole time you're feeding out twine on your net needle by allowing it to kind of unravel. I'm gonna hook that, I'm gonna hold this with my thumb, I'm gonna pinch this with my index finger here. I'm gonna go behind the two I just created once, and then I'm gonna go in between the two I just created a second time. And then I'm gonna pull that knot to the top of my mesh gauge there. Okay, and now I'm going to lock that into place by going behind them both. And that knot will end up in the same spot. That's our third. Now we're gonna go and hook our loop one more time. Feed out some twine. Okay, now we're going to pinch this with our thumb, pinch this with our index finger right there. We're gonna go behind both of them once. We're gonna go in between them once and pull that knot to the top of our mesh gauge. And now we're gonna lock that into place by going behind them both once. Okay, there's 4. We're gonna come up, do our 5th one. We're gonna go through our original loop, bring it down. We're gonna pinch it, go behind the 2 of them that we just created once, go in between the 2 of them that we just created, and pull our knot. And now we're gonna lock that in with a knot around both of them. And now we're gonna do one more mesh just to finish off this 5th mesh. I'm gonna unravel my twine here. We're gonna go through our main loop, down, pinch with our thumb, pinch with our index finger, behind both of them once, in between the 2 we just created once, pull that down, and then we're gonna lock that in with one more knot. Okay, now this is our first row of meshes, and that is unique. That first row of meshes must be done like that. But our next row of meshes and all of the other meshes throughout this entire net are the exact same. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. You can see all of those meshes right now. Now this is a 5x5 mesh. Now let's say you want to do a full-size gill net, which is 6 feet wide, let's say. If you did 6 feet wide, these are about 1 or 2 inches. Let's just say they're 1-inch meshes. If you want 6 feet wide, 12 times 6 is 72 meshes. We've done 5, so we would need to do 72 meshes to do a 6-foot wide net, okay? This first row indicates our width from left to right, and how many meshes we do down from here indicates our height. So typically the height is shorter than the width. Okay, to start our second row of meshes, and all meshes from here on out, we take our mesh gauge, we go up to our knot, we go through our up and under through our first mesh, and then we pull it to the mesh gauge. Now on the first row, and only the first row of meshes, you remember how we went like that and we used that portion right there for weaving? We don't do that on any of these other meshes. We only did that on the first row, and that was just to create that initial first row of loops. So what we do is we pull it up to as far as we can pull it. We pinch with our thumb, we pinch with our thumb, we pinch with our index finger, and we go behind the mesh with the two pieces right here, behind that once, and we go in between it, just like we did before, once. Got a mesh caught in there. And then we pull our knot snug. And we don't have to lock this one in. We can go straight to the next mesh. Now we go straight to the next mesh, we pull it up, we pull it down to our mesh gauge, which sizes our mesh. We hold it with our thumb, hold it with our index finger, go behind the two of them, just like that right there. And then we go in between the two of them, and we pull our knot down snug. Now we go do it again. Go into our third mesh and pull it down, pinch it with our thumb, pinch it with our index finger. Got to feed out some twine here. It's getting caught on the tip there. And now we go behind the two we just made, right there, behind those two, and then between those two. And then just make sure nothing else is trapped in there. And then you just pull that knot to the top of your mesh gauge. Then we just hook our other mesh, just like that right there. Pull it down, pinch with our thumb, pinch with our index finger like this right here, so that you're going behind these two and up through this loop. Behind these two once, in between those two once, and then we're pulling to the top of our gauge. Then we hook our next loop. Up under, pinch with our thumb, pinch with our index finger, going behind those two once, in between those two once, pull down. And now we hook our last. We've got one more mesh over here we're going to hook. Actually, no, that's just our where we originally tied on. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meshes. We can go ahead and slide those off. You can see our net starting to come together a little bit. We're going to go and start wherever our string's at is where we start. So we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to put our mesh gauge up to our knot. We're going to go through our first mesh, pull it down to the mesh gauge. That gives us a mesh this size right here. We're going to pinch, pinch, behind the two of them, in between the two of them, and pull it down. Feed out some more twine. Going to go under, grab the next mesh, pull it down, pinch, pinch, behind the two, in between the two, and pull it down. Grab the next mesh, pinch, pinch, behind the two, between the two, pull it down. Grab our next mesh. Pinch, pinch. Behind the two. Between the two. Then we got one more mesh over here to grab. Grab that. Behind, between, pull it down. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 rows of meshes now. We've got 2 more to go to make our 5 by 5. Kind of see it coming together there. Start where our string's at, grab our first mesh, pinch, pinch, behind the two, between the two, pull it down. Now I got a little sloppy there. See how my knot's higher than my mesh gauge? So that mesh is going to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to have to make sure not to do that again. Grab my next mesh. I'm going to pinch, pinch, behind the two, between the two, pull it tight. Grab my next mesh, pull it down, pinch, pinch, behind, between, pull it down. Behind, between, pull it down. Got one more mesh here. Grab it, pinch, pinch, behind, between, knot it down. One more row to go. And that finishes our little 5x5. Maybe I'll do 2 more rows just so you can see it. Just so you can see. I'll do 2 more rows and I won't say anything. I'll just let you watch. And this will be my last mesh right there, and I'm going to finish it off the exact same way. I'm going to pinch, pinch, feed out some twine here. I'm going to go behind the 2 of them, up through this big loop, in between the 2 of them. I'm going to knot it off. And that finishes up this little net right here. So you could see kind of how you could create a much larger net. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the loop that it was attached to, and then where I tied to it, I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And now what we've made here, and I'm going to cut off my net needle, and once I spread it out, you'll see kind of what we've got. We've got a net with those initial loops that we made along the top here, which that's where you could tie your top line to. If you were going to stretch this gill net across a creek or a lake, you could tie these to your top line, and then along the bottom here you could put another rope through along the bottom and put some sinkers if you wanted, or you could just tie another rope along the bottom, weaving it in and out of these bottom meshes to stretch this net across a creek or a pond. But that is, in general, the basic process for weaving an entire gill net large enough to span a small creek or even a pond. The only row that's different is that top row, and then all of the other meshes are the exact same. So there you have it, how to weave a gill net using a net needle that you make from materials that you could literally find in the woods. Now, if any of you guys are like me, patience is not your strong suit. This was a real challenge for me. When I learned this several years ago, it was a real challenge for me to sit down and go through the necessary time that it took to understand how to make this gill net. And quite frankly, I don't know that I really enjoyed doing it, but I do consider net making a critical survival skill, because some of your most popular food sources in the wild, and especially for the people that lived in that Siberian village on the coast of the Yenisei River, fish is where it's at when it comes to surviving. And quite frankly, the best way to catch them is using some type of a net or gill net. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you took the time to struggle through watching those gory details, but it is a skill worth learning. And remember, it's not if, but when.